Okay, I'm going to do lesson 7, the opposite of a number, simplifying more difficult notations. This is on page 34. And we're going to talk about what the opposite of a number means. So when we have a negative number, it is the opposite of the number that is positive on the other side of the number line. So in the middle, we have a 0. This is called the origin. And let's say that 2 places to the right, we have a positive 2. And then 2 places to the left of that origin, we have a negative 2. Well, that negative 2 is the opposite of the positive 2. It's often helpful to read a negative sign as the opposite of. Then it's easy to locate something in when you're thinking about it in terms of another number. So that means that every time you see a negative sign, that you can think the opposite of, the opposite of, the opposite of, if you have multiple opposite negative signs. So you'll see on the examples on 7A that there is one where they have a negative
Houston, we have a problem.
Times the negative 2. So that is the opposite of negative 2, which means positive 2. Okay. And then if you look down a little bit below that, we have the opposite of, the opposite of, the opposite of 2,
Houston, we have
which
a problem.
just means a negative 2. So if you remember, that when we multiply negatives and positives, that we have a rule. So a negative times a negative is equal to a positive, but also a positive times a positive is equal to a positive. But a negative times a positive is equal to a negative, and a positive times a negative is equal to a negative. So that means if you count the number of negative signs, so in this case, 1, 2, 3, if you have an odd number of negative signs, your answer is going to be negative, whether it's 1 negative, 3 negatives, 5 negatives, 7 negatives, 11 negatives. Whatever the amount of negatives is, an odd amount of them, it's going to be a negative number. Whereas if you have a even number of negatives like this is 2 negatives, it's going to be a positive answer, whether it's 2 negatives, 4, 6, 8, 10, 20, 100, it's going to be positive. So that will help you as you work through these problems. Okay, so let's look at simplifying some more difficult notations. This is on the bottom of page 34. Okay, so you'll notice there are 2 negatives right here, and there's 2 negatives right here, and there's a negative and a positive right here. Well, before we get into that, let's just look at what the terms are. So the terms are the sets of numbers that are in between the plus and minus signs. So this is a term, and this is a term, and then this whole thing is a term. Okay. So you'll notice that there's 2 negatives here. So this means that this is a positive 4. There's a negative and a positive here. So this is a negative 2. And then this is 2 negatives here. So this is a positive 6. Okay. Now that we've come down to the next line will simplify. This is 4 minus 2, and then we have 2 positives here, which makes it a positive 6. Now remember, this is positive, positive, negative, negative. Okay, so that's where I'm getting this. Now we can add this algebraically, right? So we have a positive 4 and a positive 6, and I'm sorry, positive 4 and a positive 6, we'll add those together, and that'll be 10 minus 2, which is a positive 8. Okay, let's do another one. All right, this is example 7.1. This is on the bottom of page 34. So the opposite of a positive 4 minus the opposite of 5 plus 5 minus the opposite of 3 plus the opposite of 6. Okay, I'm going to go through and find all the terms. And you notice that the minus or plus goes with whatever is behind it. Okay, now this is going to be negative. This has 2 negatives, so it's going to be positive. This has just 1 plus sign, so it's positive. 2 negatives, so that's going to be a positive 3. A positive and a negative, so that's going to be a negative 6. Okay, now I'm going to find all of my numbers that have the like signs. Remember, if the sign is the same, we're going to add and keep the sign. It's our rule from the other day. So we've got a positive 5, a positive 5, a positive 3. So that's 13. And then we have a negative 4 and a negative 6. That's a negative 10. Okay, then the next thing we do is after we've added everything that's the same, if the signs are different, find the difference and keep the sign of the larger number. So the larger number here is 13. So we're going to subtract 10 from 13. So that's going to be a positive 3. Okay, let's do another one. (7.2). All right, the opposite of a negative 3 minus the opposite of 2 plus the opposite of 3. Okay, let's look. We've got 2 negatives, so that's going to be positive. And then here we have 1, 2, 3 negatives. So that is an odd amount of negatives before the number. So that's going to be a negative number. Another way that we could look at it is we could say that these 2 negatives make a positive. And then once we bring this down, this negative and positive make a negative. Either way, this is going to be a negative 2. All right. And then here we have 2 negatives. That's an odd amount of negatives. So that's going to be a negative number as well. So that's negative. Well, there's two negatives. That's an even amount of negatives. Sorry, even amount of negatives. So that's going to be a positive number. And see that it doesn't say anything about what to do with the positive. You don't have to worry about that. We're only concerned about the two negatives, which make a positive. All right, now we're going to add all the numbers that have the same sign. So the two threes have the same sign, so that's a positive 6. And then minus 2, so this is going to be 4. All right, now let's go to 7.3. We have the opposite of 4, plus then plus a negative 2, minus a opposite of 6. Okay, we're simplify each term. You'll notice in your book that they just put a circle around them like this. Could do it that way. So this is two negatives, that's positive. A negative and a positive, so that's a negative. Three negatives, so that's an odd amount of negatives, so it's a negative. Add the negatives together, they're the same. Negative 8. Find the difference. The difference between 8 and 4 is 4. We use the sign of the larger number, so it's a negative 4. All right. Now, go ahead and do those practice problems. Pause the video while you do them, and then come back and check. It's an odd amount, so it's negative. Even amount, positive. All right, guys. I'm going to check these real quick, make sure I got them right. Uh, 7, 1, 7, and 5. That's right. Okay, so homework is for a problem set for lesson 7. And I will post a separate video for lesson 8. All right, thanks.